The Vitale estate sat on a hill like a clenched fist, all stone and shadow, even in the afternoon light. See us. Elara's little car coughed as she parked between two black SUVs that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. She sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, her palms damp against the leather. Her portfolio leaned against the passenger seat, its edges worn from years of hopeful meetings. She was a children's book illustrator. Her world was watercolor bunnies and pastel dragons, not this fortress of iron gates and men in suits who looked at her like she was a misplaced pastry. She was curvy, soft in the hips, round in the belly, with arms that dimpled when she waved. She'd long stopped apologizing for it, but the world hadn't stopped reminding her, especially not places like this. She wore a sunflower yellow dress with a paint stain on the hem, and her hair was twisted up in a clip that kept slipping. She looked, she knew, like a cupcake in a room full of knives. A man named Marco met her at the door. He was all sharp angles and suspicion. "You're the painter?" he asked, his tone suggesting he'd expected someone else. Someone thinner, maybe. Someone who looked less like she'd wandered in from a library story hour. "Illustrator," she corrected gently. "I'm here for the nursery mural. Mr. Vitale hired me." Marco's lip twitched. "Right. The nursery. Follow me." She walked through halls that echoed. Her flats made soft sounds on the marble, but the house itself seemed to hold its breath. Portraits of severe men lined the walls, their eyes following her. She clutched her portfolio tighter. She'd been hired by Dante Vitale himself, after he'd seen her work at a charity auction, a series of whimsical forest scenes she'd donated. He'd approached her afterward, a tall, broad-shouldered man with eyes like winter storms and a voice that rumbled from somewhere deep. "My nephew needs a room that doesn't feel like a cage," he'd said. "Can you do that?" She'd said yes. She always said yes to children. The nursery was on the third floor, at the end of a long corridor. Marco pushed open the door and gestured her inside without a word. The room was large but bare, with a single window overlooking the gardens. A little boy sat on the floor, surrounded by a fortress of picture books. He was maybe 5, with dark curls and serious eyes that were too old for his face. He looked up when she entered, and something in his gaze made her heart clench. "You're the paint lady," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Elara," she said, crouching down to his level. Her knees popped, and she smiled through it. "And you must be Matteo." He nodded solemnly. "My papa used to draw for me, before he went away." Elara's smile faltered. She'd been briefed. Barely. Matteo's father, Lorenzo Vitale, had vanished 2 years ago. No body, no note, no explanation. The family called it a disappearance. The rumors called it something darker. Dante had stepped in as guardian, but the boy was adrift in a house that didn't know how to hold him. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "What did he draw?" Matteo picked up a worn book from the pile. Its cover was faded, the title barely legible. "The Adventures of Little Fox." He held it out to her like a sacred object. "This one. He made it for me. There's a fox who looks for his family." Elara took the book carefully. The pages were thick, hand-bound, filled with illustrations that were clearly amateur, but full of love. A little orange fox wandered through forests, crossed rivers, climbed mountains. Each page was a new landscape, a new challenge. The fox was always alone, but always hopeful. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. "Your papa was a wonderful artist." Matteo's eyes brightened. Just a flicker. "You think so? Uncle Dante says it's just scribbles." "Uncle Dante is wrong," she said, and immediately regretted it. "You didn't call a mafia boss wrong in his own house." But Matteo giggled, a small, surprised sound, and she decided it was worth whatever consequences might come. She spent the next hour with Matteo, sketching ideas on a notepad while he showed her his favorite books. He was a quiet child, but when he talked about his father, his voice grew animated. Papa said the fox would find his way home someday. He said. He promised. Elara's throat tightened. She'd grown up without a father too, though hers had left by choice, not mystery. She understood the ache of waiting for someone who might never come back. When Marco returned to escort her out, she'd already filled 3 pages with concepts. A forest that wrapped around the walls, with hidden animals and secret paths. A sky that changed from night to day as you moved around the room. A little fox, always present, always searching. "The boss wants to see you," Marco said, his tone making it clear this was not a request. Dante Vitale's office was on the ground floor, behind a door that looked like it could withstand a bomb. Inside, the room was all dark wood and leather, the air thick with the scent of coffee, and something sharper, like ozone before a storm. Dante sat behind a massive desk, his sleeves rolled up, his forearms corded with muscle. He was reading something on a tablet, but he looked up when she entered, and the full force of his attention was almost physical. "Miss Elara," he said. "Sit." She sat, her portfolio balanced on her lap like a shield. "Matteo likes you," he said. "He doesn't like many people." "He's a wonderful child," she said. "He misses his father very much." Dante's jaw tightened. His father is gone. He needs to accept that. "Maybe," she said carefully, "but acceptance doesn't mean forgetting. The mural I'm planning. It's a forest with a little fox. From his favorite book. I think it might help him feel connected." Dante leaned back, studying her. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. "You're soft," he said finally. "Soft voice, soft body, soft art. This family isn't soft." Elara's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. "Soft doesn't mean weak, Mr. Vitale. A forest is soft, but it can swallow you whole." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or curiosity. "You're not afraid of me." "Should I be?" A long pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. "Most people are. Most people don't paint bunnies for a living," she said. "We're a fearless breed." He didn't laugh, but the tension in the room eased a fraction. "The mural. You have a plan?" She opened her portfolio and showed him her sketches. He looked at them for a long time, his expression unreadable. "The fox," he said. "It's from Lorenzo's book." "Yes. Matteo showed it to me. It's a lovely story." "It's a fairy tale," Dante said, but his voice was rougher now. Lorenzo was always dreaming, always drawing. It made him weak. "Or it made him human," Elara said quietly. Dante's eyes snapped to hers. For a moment, she thought she'd gone too far, but then he nodded. A single, sharp motion. "Start tomorrow. Marco will give you whatever you need." She was dismissed. She gathered her things and stood, her legs a little shaky. At the door, she paused. "Mr. Vitale? The book?" "The Adventures of Little Fox." "Do you have any other copies? Or any of your brother's other drawings?" "Why?" "I'd like to incorporate more of his style into the mural, to honor him, for Matteo." Dante was silent for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "There's a box in the attic. Old sketchbooks, some paintings. I'll have it brought down." "Thank you," she said, and meant it more than he could know. Over the next week, Elara transformed the nursery. She arrived early each morning, her arms laden with paints and brushes, and worked until the evening light faded. Matteo became her constant companion. He sat on a small stool, watching her with rapt attention, occasionally handing her a brush, or offering his opinion on which shade of green was best for the forest canopy. She took his suggestions seriously, and he bloomed under the attention. The family noticed. They drifted in and out, these sharp-suited men and cold-eyed women, and their reactions ranged from dismissive to openly mocking. An aunt with diamond earrings and a viper's smile paused in the doorway one afternoon. "How quaint," she said, her gaze sliding over Elara's curves with barely concealed disdain, a little chubby fairy sprinkling her magic. "Do you really think this will help the boy? He needs discipline, not daydreams." Elara kept painting. "He needs both," she said evenly. "But right now, he needs to feel safe." The aunt sniffed and left. Matteo looked up at Elara, his brow furrowed. "Aunt Celia doesn't like me." "I think Aunt Celia doesn't like a lot of things," Elara said. "That's her problem, not yours." Matteo considered this, then nodded. "Can we add a dragon?" "Absolutely," Elara said. "Every good forest needs a dragon." But it was the book that drew her in. Every evening, after the painting was done, and Matteo was tucked into his temporary bed in another room, Elara would sit in the nursery and study The Adventures of Little Fox. She'd borrowed it from Matteo, with a promise to keep it safe, and she'd pored over its pages, like a scholar examining a sacred text. There was something about the illustrations that nagged at her. They were simple, almost childlike, but certain elements repeated in ways that felt deliberate. A particular cluster of trees on page 3 appeared again on page 7, but mirrored. A river on page 5 had a bend that matched the curve of a mountain path on page 12. The little fox's journey seemed random, but when she traced it with her finger, it formed a pattern. She was an illustrator. She understood visual language, the way shapes could carry meaning, the way perspective could hide secrets. Lorenzo Vitale might have been an amateur, but he was also, she suspected, a man who knew exactly what he was doing. One night, she spread the pages across the floor of the nursery, arranging them in order. The mural loomed around her, half-finished, the forest taking shape in shades of emerald and gold. She'd painted the little fox into every scene, just as it appeared in the book, and as she looked from the mural to the pages, something clicked. The fox's path wasn't random, it was a map. Her heart began to pound. She grabbed a piece of tracing paper and laid it over the first page, copying the key elements: the fox's starting point, the cluster of trees, the bend in the river, then the second page, and the third. When she overlaid them, the elements aligned. The trees became markers, the river became a boundary, the mountain became a destination. It was a map of the Vitale estate. She sat back on her heels, her breath coming fast. This wasn't just a children's story. Lorenzo had hidden something in plain sight, something meant for his son. But what, and why? The next morning, she arrived earlier than usual. The box from the attic had been delivered the night before, left outside the nursery door. She dragged it inside and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were sketchbooks, loose drawings, a few small canvases. Lorenzo's work. She spread them out, comparing them to the book. The style was consistent, whimsical, warm, full of hidden details. But as she looked closer, she saw the same patterns repeating, the same cluster of trees, the same river bend, the same mountain. And in one sketchbook, tucked between drawings of birds and flowers, she found a page that made her blood run cold. It was a list of names, written in a cramped, hurried script. Next to each name was a number, and at the bottom of the page, a single line. "The fox knows the way. Trust the fox." She was still staring at the page when the door opened, and Dante walked in. He was dressed for the day, but his eyes were shadowed, as if he hadn't slept. "You're here early," he said. Then he saw the papers spread across the floor, the book open, her face pale. "What is this?" "I think," Elara said slowly, "your brother left a message." Dante's expression hardened. He crossed the room in 3 strides and crouched beside her, his presence overwhelming. "Explain." She showed him. The book, the patterns, the overlay. The sketchbook with the list of names. "It's a map," she said. "The fox's journey. It's not just a story. It's directions. The trees are landmarks. The river is the boundary of your property. The mountain, I think it's the old chapel, the one on the north edge of the estate. And these names, these numbers, they look like accounts. Financial accounts." Dante stared at the pages, his jaw working. Lorenzo was the family accountant. He handled everything. The legitimate businesses, the other ones. When he disappeared, we thought he'd run off with the ledgers. There were rumors he'd been skimming, that he'd betrayed us. But there was never any proof. "What if he didn't run?" Elara said. "What if someone took him, and he hid the ledgers to protect them, to protect Matteo?" Dante's eyes met hers. For the first time, she saw something other than cold control in his gaze. She saw grief and hope. "You really think this is real?" "I know visual codes," she said. "I've studied them. Medieval manuscripts, Renaissance paintings, artists have been hiding messages in plain sight for centuries. Your brother wasn't a professional, but he was clever. He created a cipher only his son would understand, because only his son would love the story enough to study it." "But Matteo's 5, Dante said. "He couldn't. He wouldn't need to," Elara interrupted. "Not yet. The book was meant to be kept safe until he was old enough. But someone else was supposed to find it. Someone who would take the time to look." She paused. "Someone like me." Dante stood abruptly, pacing the room. His movements were restless, predatory. "If this is true, then someone in my family is responsible for my brother's disappearance. Someone who wanted the ledgers. Or someone who wanted them to stay hidden," Elara said. "The names on this list, do you recognize them?" Dante took the sketchbook, his eyes scanning the page. His face went pale. "These are family members, uncles, cousins, and these numbers. These are offshore accounts. Millions of dollars, money that was supposed to be in the family trust. Stolen. Embezzled," he said, his voice a low growl. "Over years, Lorenzo must have discovered it. He was trying to document everything, to build a case, but before he could expose them, they silenced him. And made it look like he was the thief," Elara finished. Dante turned to her, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "You found this. You, with your soft art and your gentle heart. You saw what none of us did. I just paid attention," she said. "To the story. To Matteo." "No," he said. "You cared. That's different." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Something shifted in the air between them, a current of understanding that went beyond words. Then Dante nodded, a decisive jerk of his chin. "We need to find the ledgers. If they're at the chapel, we go tonight. But first, we need to keep this quiet. No one can know what you've discovered." "What about Matteo?" Elara asked. "He deserves to know his father didn't abandon him." "He will know," Dante said, "when it's safe, when the people who did this are dealt with." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Elara continued painting, but her mind was elsewhere. She added the little fox to the mural, positioning it at the base of the painted mountain, its nose pointed toward the chapel. It was a secret only she and Dante shared. Matteo came in after lunch, and she read him the story again, her voice steady, even as her heart raced. He leaned against her side, his small body warm and trusting. and she thought about the weight of what his father had left him. Not just a story, but a legacy, a truth. That evening, after the house had settled into silence, Dante came to the nursery. He was dressed in dark clothes, his expression grim. "Are you ready?" "I'm coming with you?" she asked, surprised. "You're the only one who can read the map," he said, "and I trust you." The words hit her harder than she expected. Trust, from a man like Dante Vitale, was not given lightly. She nodded, grabbing her jacket. "Let's go." The chapel was a crumbling stone building at the edge of the estate, half swallowed by ivy and shadow. They walked in silence, the only sounds the crunch of gravel under their feet and the distant hoot of an owl. Dante carried a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. Elara carried the book, clutched against her chest like a talisman. Inside, the chapel was cold and damp, smelling of old stone and decay. The pews were gone, the altar bare, but the floor was intact, and that was what mattered. Elara opened the book to the final page, where the little fox stood at the base of the mountain, looking up at a star. The star had 5 points, and in the illustration, it was positioned directly above the fox's head. "The star," she said. "It's a marker. We need to find something with a star on it." They searched the chapel, their flashlights sweeping over the walls and floor. Near the altar, Elara found it. A loose stone, carved with a faint 5-pointed star. "Here," she breathed. Dante knelt beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. Together, they pried the stone up. Beneath it was a metal box, rusted but intact. Dante lifted it out, his hands trembling slightly. He opened the lid. Inside were ledgers, dozens of them, filled with meticulous records of every transaction, every embezzlement, every betrayal, and beneath the ledgers, a letter. Dante unfolded it, his flashlight illuminating the familiar, looping handwriting. He read aloud, his voice rough. "To my son, Matteo. If you're reading this, I'm gone. But I didn't leave you. I would never leave you. The fox always finds his way home. I hid the truth, where only you would find it, because you're the only one who ever believed in my stories. Be brave, little fox. Your Uncle Dante will protect you. Trust him. Trust the story. I love you." Dante's voice broke on the last words. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. Elara reached out, her hand hovering over his back, unsure if she should touch him. But then he turned to her, and his eyes were wet. "He didn't run," he said. "He was trying to protect us. And I thought he was weak. I thought his art was foolish." "You know the truth now," she said softly. "That's what matters. Because of you," he said. "Because you saw value in a children's book. Because you treated my nephew like a person, not a burden." He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "You're not soft, Elara. You're the strongest person I've ever met." The next few days were a whirlwind. Dante moved swiftly, using the ledgers to confront the guilty family members. There were arrests, exiles, shattered alliances. Aunt Celia was among the conspirators, her diamond earrings confiscated, along with her freedom. The family was torn apart, but from the wreckage, something new began to emerge. Dante took full control, but his rule was different now. Less about fear, more about loyalty. He started visiting the nursery more often, sitting with Matteo while Elara painted, reading the story of the little fox with a new reverence. And Elara? She finished the mural. It was beautiful. A forest that seemed to breathe, with hidden animals peeking from behind trees, and a sky that shifted from twilight to dawn. The little fox was everywhere, always moving forward, always searching. And at the center of it all, on the wall opposite the window, she painted the mountain and the star, a reminder of what had been found, a tribute to a father's love. The day she finished, the family gathered in the nursery. It was the first time they'd all been in the same room since the revelations. Dante stood at the front, Matteo in his arms. The boy's eyes were wide as he took in the mural, his mouth forming a perfect O. "It's Papa's story," he whispered. "You painted Papa's story." "I did," Elara said, her voice thick, "because it's the most important story in the world." Matteo wriggled out of Dante's arms and ran to her, throwing his small arms around her legs. "Thank you," he said, muffled against her skirt. "Thank you for finding Papa." She knelt and hugged him back, her own tears spilling over. "Your Papa found you, sweetheart. He never stopped looking." Dante watched them, his expression unreadable. But when Elara looked up, he nodded at her, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that said more than words could. Later, after the others had left, he stayed behind. "You've changed everything," he said. "This family, this house, it was a prison. You've made it a home." "I just painted some walls," she said. "You know that's not true." He stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "You saw my brother's heart when no one else did. You gave Matteo back his father. You gave me back my purpose." He paused, his voice dropping. "I don't want you to leave." Elara's heart stuttered. "I have a job, a life. I'm not asking you to give that up," he said. "I'm asking you to consider staying, not as an employee, as part of this family, as someone I can't bear to lose." She looked at him, this man who had been so cold, so closed off, and saw the cracks in his armor, saw the longing he was trying so hard to hide. "Dante," she said, and his name felt new on her tongue. "I'm not the kind of woman who fits into a world like this. I'm curvy, and I paint bunnies, and I cry at sad commercials. I don't belong in a mafia empire." "You belong wherever you want to be," he said, "and I want you here. Not because you're useful, not because you solved a mystery, because you're you. Because when you smile, this whole damn house feels lighter. Because Matteo laughs now, really laughs. And that's because of you. Because He stopped, swallowing hard. Because I've never met anyone who looked at me like I was a person, instead of a threat." She reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek. He flinched, just slightly, as if tenderness was a foreign language. "You are a person," she said. "A good one, underneath all that armor. And I think I'd like to stay, for a while, to see where this goes." He exhaled, a sound that was almost a laugh. "For a while," he repeated. "I'll take it." And then, in the nursery surrounded by painted trees and hidden foxes, Dante Vitale, the most feared man in the city, leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers. It wasn't a kiss, it was something more intimate, a promise. Weeks passed. The mural became famous, in a quiet way. Family members who had mocked Elara's soft art now brought their children to see it, their eyes wide with wonder. The story of Lorenzo's hidden map spread through the underworld, a legend of love and cleverness. And Elara found herself at the center of a family she'd never expected to join. She still painted. She took on new commissions. But her home base was the Vitale estate. She had a studio now, a sunlit room next to the nursery, and Matteo often wandered in to watch her work. He'd started drawing too, his little hands clutching crayons as he created his own stories. "I'm going to be an illustrator," he told her one day, his voice fierce. "Like you and Papa." "You'll be amazing," she said, and meant it. Dante came to her studio every evening. He'd sit in the corner, reading reports, or just watching her paint, his presence a steady comfort. They talked about everything and nothing. His day, her projects, Matteo's latest adventures. Slowly, the walls between them crumbled. He told her about his childhood, about the pressure of being the eldest, about the guilt he carried for not protecting Lorenzo. She told him about her own father, about the years of feeling invisible, about learning to love her body in a world that told her she shouldn't. "You're beautiful," he said one night, out of nowhere. They were sitting on the floor of the nursery, Matteo asleep in the next room. The mural glowed in the moonlight, the little fox seeming to move in the shadows. Elara blinked. "What?" "You're beautiful," he repeated. "I should have said it sooner. I should have said it the first day I saw you, at that auction, when you were standing next to your paintings, and you looked so proud and so scared. I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, and I was too much of a coward to say it." "You're not a coward," she said. "I was," he said. "I was afraid of what it would mean, to want someone, to need someone, but I'm not afraid anymore." He reached for her, his hand cupping her cheek. "Elara, She kissed him. It was impulsive, a little clumsy, her nose bumping his. But he made a sound, low and hungry, and pulled her closer, and suddenly they were tangled together on the nursery floor, surrounded by painted trees and the ghost of a little fox. His hands were gentle, so gentle, tracing the curves of her body, like she was something precious. "Soft," he murmured against her lips. "You're so soft." "Is that a problem?" she asked, breathless. "It's a miracle," he said. "Every part of you. I want to worship every part of you." And he did. That night, and many nights after, he learned her body, with the same intensity he brought to everything. He kissed the dimples on her thighs, the swell of her belly, the stretch marks on her hips. He whispered things that made her blush, made her laugh, made her cry. He made her feel, for the first time in her life, that her softness was not a flaw, but a gift. The family noticed the change in him. He smiled more. He laughed. He brought Elara to dinners and held her hand under the table. Some of the older relatives grumbled about the chubby painter who had bewitched the boss, but they said it quietly and never within Dante's hearing, because the one time someone made a comment, a cousin who sneered about Elara's weight at a family gathering. Dante's reaction was swift and terrifying. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the man, his eyes like chips of ice, and said, "You will apologize to her, now. And if I ever hear you speak of her with anything less than respect, you will no longer be part of this family. Do you understand?" The cousin stammered an apology, his face pale. Elara squeezed Dante's hand, a silent thank you. She didn't need him to fight her battles, but it was nice to know he would. Months turned into a year. Matteo grew taller, his drawings more intricate. The nursery mural became a touchstone for the family, a symbol of resilience and love. And on the anniversary of Lorenzo's disappearance, Dante and Elara took Matteo to the chapel. They stood before the altar, the star-carved stone replaced now, and Dante told the boy the whole story, about his father's courage, his cleverness, his love, about the book and the map and the ledgers, about how his father had never stopped fighting to come home. Matteo listened, his small face solemn. When Dante finished, the boy walked to the stone and placed his hand on it. "I'll be brave," he said. "Like the little fox, like Papa," Elara cried. Dante held her, his own eyes wet, and in that moment, surrounded by the echoes of the past and the promise of the future, they were a family. That night, back at the estate, Dante proposed. It wasn't grand or elaborate. He simply knelt beside her in the nursery, the mural glowing behind him, and held out a ring. It was simple, a silver band with a tiny fox engraved on the inside. "I'm not good with words," he said, "but I'm good with promises, and I promise to love you, to protect you, to see you, all of you, for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" She said yes. Of course she said yes. The wedding was small, held in the garden of the estate. Matteo was the ring-bearer, his chest puffed out with pride. The family attended, even the ones who had once mocked her, their smiles now genuine. And when Elara walked down the aisle in a dress that hugged every curve, her hair loose and flowers in her hands, Dante looked at her like she was the sun. "You're my home," he whispered as they exchanged vows. "You and Matteo, you're my whole world." "And you're mine," she said. "My fierce, protective, secretly soft man." They kissed, and the family cheered. And somewhere in the distance, a fox darted through the trees, its tail a flash of orange against the green. Years later, when Matteo was grown and taking his place in the family business, he would tell the story of his father and the illustrator. He would show people the mural, still vibrant on the nursery walls, and the book, carefully preserved in a glass case. "She saw what no one else could," he would say. "Because she believed in stories, she believed in me, and that belief saved us all." And Elara, sitting beside Dante on the porch of their home, her hand in his, would smile. She was still curvy, still soft, still painting bunnies and dragons and little foxes. But she was also the heart of a Mafia empire, the woman who had decoded a family map and found a love worth more than any ledger. She was proof that the softest things could be the strongest, that a children's book could hold the key to a kingdom, that a woman who took up space could change the world. The fox had found its way home, and so had she.